Delighted to have you all here and welcome to the EFC and to this breakfast panel discussion with Alliance and Wings. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking the European Foundation Centre for enabling us to have this session today, and to our partners Wings, the global philanthropy infrastructure body, for working with us. I'm Charles Keidan, the editor of Alliance magazine. For those who don't know, a magazine that covers news and views of philanthropy globally, with an emphasis on trying to present perspectives from outside of the kind of British-American sphere of philanthropy. And Alliance, as is customary, runs a quarterly breakfast discussion to launch each of our special features that appear in each of the quarterly magazines, and we're delighted to be in Brussels here today to do so. Usually we're doing them in London. And the objective of our conversation today is to illuminate philanthropy's global infrastructure, what it is, what it does, and who it serves. We'll be highlighting some of the key issues, some of the key trends and controversies that are presented both in the special feature and also more broadly. And to do that, we follow a typical format, which involves some contributions from my co-panelists that I'll introduce in a moment, as well as lots of time and space for debate and discussion with you all here. The hashtag tags we'll be using are Lift Up Philanthropy, which will be the framework for some of Wings' promotional work on this topic over the next month, but also Philanthropy Works, which is the hashtag for the EFC Conference, so use one or both of them. So I just wanted to say all of that by way of introduction. Before I introduce the panellists, I want to just briefly introduce this special feature that you'll see in the magazine here. Philanthropy's Developers, a new vision for the future of philanthropy infrastructure. Jerry Sololi, the Chief Executive of the European Foundation Centre, said that infrastructure for philanthropy is rather like a skeleton than it is scaffolding. You need it all the time, and unlike scaffolding, you can't dispense with it. And he said that at a meeting of infrastructure funders earlier this year. And just as a human body would collapse without a skeleton, so philanthropy can't function without the support and development infrastructure that underpins it. Whether that's data and research, or advice and consulting, training, advocacy, representation, academic knowledge, all of those aspects come together to form an essential but underappreciated ecosystem of philanthropy support worldwide. And the puzzle for some of our sector's most thoughtful practitioners is how best to provide the sustenance which philanthropy needs to do its job better, while making it financially sustainable. And that's where, of course, the funding community comes in. And to discuss these issues that are set out in the special feature that we're launching today here at the European Foundation Centre, we have some of the sector's most thoughtful practitioners, two of whom, Maria Chertok on my left and Benjamin Bellegy on my right, have superbly guest edited this issue, and I'd like to thank them for their work on that. Masha and Benjamin offer a change-oriented vision for the future of philanthropy infrastructure that you'll hear more about. Masha on my left is the director of CAF Russia and the chair of Wings. Benjamin Bellegy is executive director of Wings based in Sao Paulo. Anyone that can maybe close that back window there just for reduce the noise of passing traffic, that'd be appreciated. Hopefully the air conditioning will keep us cool. And to my right is Filiz Bikmen. She is the founding director of Esas Sosyal, a family fund based in Turkey, and a former director of the Sabancı Foundation, also based in Turkey. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Maria, who's going to speak for about 10 minutes on why she thinks that the question of philanthropy's development needs attention now. It was just a year ago at the EFC that actually Masha suggested this as a topic, and you'll see the fruits of what has occurred in the intervening year. She'll be highlighting some of the key issues, such as the emergence of non-traditional and non-institutional giving forms, and be setting out her aspirations for the field. So welcome all of you, and over to you, Masha.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. This is actually a great pleasure, despite all the kind of focus on digital, to hold on to something on paper. And so this is the first time we see the magazine. And thanks, Charles. Thanks a lot for agreeing to do it in the first place, and kind of for working with us on that. It was really a pleasure. So why we decided to do this? Well, besides the fact that Wings business is infrastructure, and it's kind of our mission to care for it and promote it. We really strongly believe that the current changes in philanthropy are really huge, and these changes could not be sustained and kind of taken advantage of if not for infrastructure. So what we're saying that alongside the traditional philanthropic actors like foundations, we see many, many others. And some of them maybe not even institutionalized, like movements or giving circles or some volunteer groups that work on the local level. Some of them operate on the borderlines between philanthropy and business, or philanthropy and politics. And it's kind of a much bigger field now, and much more diverse field. And with the current attitude to infrastructure, which basically includes philanthropic associations like the EFC and some support organizations like CAF, and that was all that was in our notion of what infrastructure is. It's kind of limiting, and we need to look at the potential which philanthropy has, philanthropy in its kind of broader sense, and make sure this potential is realized. Like my colleagues at CAF published relatively recently a paper which is called "Laying the Groundwork for Growing Giving." And basically the most astonishing part of it is that if we look at the middle classes, at the growth of middle classes across the world, not just in the kind of Europe, America regions, we can expect that if these middle classes give at least 0.5% of their spending to charitable causes, the giving will rise to an astonishing amount of over $3 billion per year. This obviously would not be possible without infrastructure, because these people need to go somewhere, they need to build trust, they need to understand how philanthropy works, they need to find the charities they want to help, all of that. And this is now becomes part of the infrastructure, maybe the most fast-growing part of infrastructure, with all these crowdfunding platforms, giving circles, and the rest of it, which before has not been even in the picture, because it deals with a completely different type of philanthropy, like citizens' contributions. Alongside the potential, there are lots of threats, and these threats cannot be addressed by philanthropy players on their own. They need some collective mechanism, bodies, platforms, associations to deal with issues which we are facing, like shrinking space for civil society, like technological threats, lots of those. And we're dealing with governments here. We're dealing with super government entities like FATF, which is trying to limit transactional part of philanthropy, and it really affects the sector. So that's another need for a different kind of attitude to infrastructure. And when I say different kind of attitude, it kind of includes embracing different forms of it, but also for the infrastructure itself, being more cooperative and working together rather than working separately in silos and competing for the same, donors or clients. Because at the moment we see a lot of that, because, infrastructure, a lot of infrastructure is service, and you compete for, winning the service. And I don't think this is helpful because we are all building this field, and the bigger the field is, the bigger kind of the pie to share between those different service providers. So I think this is really crucial that we made this special feature of Alliance because of the Alliance kind of reach and reputation. And I hope it will be just the start of a conversation, because we really need to put infrastructure in the center of it. It's not just a kind of servant somewhere in a dark closet, with brooms and whatever includes the closet. But it would really, help philanthropy to be to achieve more impact and engage with more people, which I think is most important at the moment.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you want to say in particular about any of the articles that you commissioned, or aspirations to feature?
Yeah, we made an attempt to show this broad reach and variety of infrastructure, and actually some of the examples of impact it made, because it's really difficult to say what infrastructure achieves. As like my IT director in my office says, when everything works, you don't appreciate us. You only see us when something goes wrong. And that's probably right for any kind of infrastructure. So we need to start appreciating it and actually seeing it. And this is our way to show that it's there. So yeah, all the articles are good.
It's also very hard to visualize, as we had with the struggles over the front cover, which can never please everybody. It was an attempt to demonstrate that the growth and unlocking the potential, but also the variety and diversity. But thank you, Mesha, for that introduction. I'm going to turn now to Benjamin, who's going to talk a little bit about his vision for the issue, but also about the extent to which the thinking that you've been pioneering since you assumed your tenure at Wings is a break with the past, or actually a continuation of it. Are we in a very different domain, or are we actually continuing on some of the trends that have emerged over the last 10 years? And also to respond to questions about the urgency of this in terms of philanthropy's potential in addressing the SDGs, for example. Benjamin.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here today. I think it's really important that we actively all participate in this conversation after our introductory remarks, because we really want this to be a dialogue and a conversation and an ongoing one. So we're also very thankful, indeed, as Masha said, to Alliance magazine for turning the spotlights on this question of who are those who support the development of philanthropy, and what kind of infrastructure or what kind of ecosystem we want for what kind of philanthropy. And I think it's really a crucial issue that needs to be discussed strategically, and that's really our agenda with this issue and with Wings Network more globally, is to foster conversations among the funders community, among, of course, infrastructure organizations themselves, and not only among foundations, but also all sorts of funders who are interested in addressing social change, addressing sustainable development, and also building stronger civil society and democracy. So that's the way we're trying to frame this conversation. So thank you again for being here. Well, I think for those maybe of you who are less familiar with this concept of infrastructure, or maybe just to, as a very brief reminder, most of you in this room that we know are yourselves working in such structures, so you're familiar with it, but there's also some changes around how we understand this field of this philanthropy support ecosystem, as we like to call it, or philanthropy infrastructure. Because traditionally that was very much incarnated, if I can say, by organizations such as the EFC, which is kindly hosting us today, so like platforms of foundations, so basically associations that gather institutional philanthropic organizations. This is the archetype of what we understand as being infrastructure, but This field has been diversifying quite substantially, especially in the past 10-15 years, I guess, as Masha also was reminding us. And we are trying also to understand this evolution and to better reflect what's happening in terms of developing philanthropy. And we see that it's a very, very diverse ecosystem today, with a number of organizations who are training, who are like academic institutions that are here, are also part of this, we believe are also part of this infrastructure, online platforms for giving to allow individual donors to reach out directly to local communities on the ground. That's also a way to foster better, or I don't know if it's better, but at least to foster philanthropic flows that maybe were not possible before. It includes a number of professional services that have specialized and diversified, especially in Europe and North America, where the field is more maybe mature, or at least older in its development, if we can say. And so that's the first thing I think that is new, is to understand this diversity and understand how this all connects together, and how we can turn it from an infrastructure, meaning that we have a number of organizations that have their own specialty and that sometimes duplicate their own work and are led by their organizational interests, to a proper field, a proper ecosystem that has some kind of mission to develop philanthropy and the diversity of the philanthropic expressions and approaches, and that these actors collaborate and work together. So there is this ecosystem paper that you can see in the entrance, and we are lucky to have its author, Barry Knight, in the room today. So I guess we can debate on some of this.
Take 10%.
I guess that's one of the one important aspect of how we need to reframe a bit this discussion, this conversation. Then what else is new? I think, well, again, the term infrastructure. I think maybe it made its time. Maybe it's outdated now, this term, because when we talk about infrastructure, you're talking about a road or about a bridge, about something that is static, that is in the background, and that has no active role. Whereas that's not, part of what we do is building this infrastructure, but it's much beyond that, and it's realizing a potential, as you're saying. So it's developing philanthropy in quality, in quantity, in volumes, and it's much more proactive. So I like to give this analogy with infrastruture. If you take a road, allow cars to run on it, but it won't make car intelligent. Engineers will make the car intelligent because they have a vision, because they have skills, and because they are also investors also that support what they do. So that's really how we think we should think about this field. So yeah, just a few initial thoughts on that. And again, it's not. I think the infrastructure has in the past very much been about defending a space. So maybe that's linked also with history. I think that. For example, and we were discussing it recently also with our colleagues of the Council of Foundations, that in the US, there has been a number of laws and regulations that have been installed and that are very favorable to the development of philanthropy, and then this infrastructure, these platforms and organizations have been set up to kind of protect that. And that's, whereas we think that we should have a more aggressive or positive or conquering attitude towards that, and seeing how we can expand the field for philanthropy, not only protect it, and as you were saying, Masha, grow the philanthropic flows also, and of course increase their efficiency. So these are some of the thoughts we want to share with you on that. Yeah, so I don't want to be too long. I don't know how long I've been speaking, Charles. So you just let me know how much.
If you have more to say, please say more. We have a bit of time. Or I could ask you one question actually before we go to Filiz's response and all of you, and that is about the funding of what has traditionally been termed infrastructure, but maybe with your new vision it will become something else. And that is Ridgway White from the Mott Foundation, one of the pioneers of the development of philanthropy, says in this issue that maintaining a robust infrastructure isn't a problem to be solved. It's a never-ending process. It's essential to a strong philanthropic sector and vibrant civil society. But not all foundations have been generous in investing in the development of philanthropy at Mott. We're at a gathering of funders here. What's your aspirations in terms of the foundation community's engagement with this?
So how to say that? First, I mean, because we could say the aspiration is to fund, but I think it goes a bit beyond that. Because the response can be funding more, or can be even funding less, why not? The question is that this topic needs to become a topic, and it needs to be discussed, it needs to be thought strategically, and there needs to be strategic reflections by funders individually with their own strategy and thinking how, as a funder, I can invest in the development of philanthropy, increase the philanthropic resources for the cause I care about, for the communities I work with, or in the country I'm operating, or where I have programs. So that's the first. And then, as a sector, as a donors community, how can we reflect collectively on what kind of ecosystem we need? So for us, that's the main message, because then out of these conversations and out of this strategic thinking, the right answer will come. And of course the right answer might be some more funding, but it's not just funding for funding, or it's not infrastructure for infrastructure. It's really about what are the needs, how can we unlock the potential of philanthropy, how can philanthropy be diverse enough so that we have the community philanthropy approach, that we have institutional philanthropy, venture philanthropy, and that all of that works together and has all the tools it needs to achieve sustainable development and a sustainable society. So that's the main. I think that's the main idea. That's the main message. So that's why we've launched this lifted philanthropy campaign. So we're going to also disseminate a guide for funders to encourage this kind of reflection and what questions that we think they should ask themselves, what kind of support they could bring to the field, and so on. So that's really the message, and we hope that all of you also in this room can take part in that and foster conversations with your peers, with your funder, with your supporters, or with if you are in a infrastructure organization. So we really hope that this is going to become a global conversation, and we really already had, of course, some interesting events where we started bringing these pieces of the puzzle together and thinking on that more strategically. In Barcelona, we had this funders meeting, and we have some of our members who are also starting to include that on their agenda, on the agenda of their conferences, and so on and so forth. And to finish, I think that it's extremely critical, and we're in Europe, and we know that in Europe it's a very complicated topic. It's even a bit sensitive, this infrastructure, because we are infrastructure enthusiastic, and we're able to also showcase the impact of the field, but a lot of funders also feel a certain level of fatigue about the field, and they're not sure about what it's really actually achieving, and so we believe it's really extremely important that there is a collective conversation on that, and that together we work towards a more efficient and stronger ecosystem.
Thank you, Benjamin. It's a very interesting kind of set of comments, which I'm sure they'll be continuing the conversation, plenty more to continue in response to what you've said. But for now, I'd like to just turn actually to Filiz, who represents a funder. First, Sabancı Foundation, but now Esas Sosyal, a family fund based in Turkey. For some of your perspectives on these questions.
So thank you for having me, and good morning. I've been, putting my thoughts together, and you asked me to respond also to Masha and to Benjamin, so maybe I'll do that and then kind of follow up with my own experiences. Facebook was founded in 2004, YouTube in 2005, and Twitter in 2006. And I'm just thinking, it was 2001 when I started working in the sector, and so think about how much the world has changed around us, and also how much the sector has changed in its own evolution. And whether it be Wings, at one point I was in the coordinating committee, in EFC when I was with Sabancı Foundation on the governing council, and kind of and I was a fellow at the Center of Philanthropy in New York. I've been very lucky to benefit from this so-called infrastructure, and it's been now almost 16 or 17 years, and I looked at myself as a sort of reflection point of what all of this really means, because as a professional, and then also with the institutions that I worked with, all of this investment helped us grow. Wings also with TÜSEV and what was happening in Turkey and so forth. So what I'm about to say is a little bit of a collection and a reflection of that, and also a little bit perhaps provocative in terms of what we might need to push ourselves to do going forward. And that, to me, comes a little bit from this moment of crisis that Turkey is in. And I'm not even touching on politics, but economically. I don't know if anyone's following that, but the value that the Turkish lira has lost in the past month is just astonishing. And some people are arguing for the government to come out and bail, and others are saying, let them fall. Like, whoever's in debt and can't pay their debt, the companies fail, and they fail. Whoever survives, survives. So it's a really interesting discussion about, you know, the ups and downs and the, you know, the peaks and troughs of ecosystems, of systems themselves. And so perhaps this whole infrastructure question requires us to be a bit more cold-blooded in terms of, you know, what's emerged over the past 15, 20 years, and there's been a lot of diversity. I've never seen a chronological picture of that, but it would be interesting to see. I think EFC is now over 25 years old, right? From there, let's say, going forward, network of European foundations and other kind of institutions and groupings, and now, and most recently, Co-Impact. It's another great article about that. Just interesting to see how it evolves and to look and see what made it evolve. And so I put together kind of 5 points around this to try to bring this all together. And I think that this level of specificity is what this sector needs. I think oftentimes infrastructure doesn't really communicate very well the outcome. It's much more what Benjamin was saying in terms of being in the background. And I very much agree with Masha's point about things are changing and we need to be open to these new forms. So these 5 things. 1, philanthropy needs to be enabled. We know that. Many of us work in countries where philanthropy and civil society are not enabled, legally speaking. And there are a lot of obstacles. Right now, there are grant makers, you know, I'm working with them in Turkey, and it's difficult to get some funding to some groups because of the environment, so we all need that. In Europe, there's an issue about cross-border and tax issues and so forth. So for sure, we need that. Second, we need, you know, obviously, I think high-impact philanthropy, we would all agree, should be very engaged. So we see, you know, European Foundation Center brings us together to engage, Wings brings us together, different activities and events, and then also Co-Impact and other kind of co-funding platforms emerging over the past years, I think really shows that obviously people believe this will lead us to high-impact philanthropy, so they're doing it. And it's very issue-based. I think that's also something we're seeing emerging a lot around this kind of infrastructure. It's not just about research and data, it's about acting together and engaging together. Third, entrepreneurial. I think that's for sure this kind of chronology we're seeing, much more testing, EVPA, and, you know, different forms of these giving circles and Silicon Valley philanthropy and all these other things that we're hearing about, and even, you know, so many organizations, especially in Silicon Valley, not even setting up nonprofit systems. They're setting up for-profit structures to do their social good. And all that's happening with impact investing. So certainly, there are some people in this world that believe the infrastructure of philanthropy requires entrepreneurial approaches as well. The fourth, effectiveness. Definitely obsessed with impact. We can see a lot of that, and I think a lot of what philanthropy infrastructure organizations are trying to do is promote the issue around impact in different ways. And I think there we need to be, maybe stop a little bit and be a bit honest. There's just a lot more choices now for a donor. A lot more choices and a lot more opportunities. So clearly impact is going to come to the forefront because it makes us, it helps us make better decisions. You know, should a platform that raises funds for 100 charities, is that high impact if we don't know the outcome of those charities? If we don't even know what kind of impact they're creating, for instance, right? So why would someone give to a platform just to promote giving? They're going to want to give to the most effective point of entry. So I think effectiveness and impact is clearly something that the infrastructure of philanthropy and the organizations working in the space are working on and should be working on more. And the second point around that is the membership organizations, and particularly the organizations that emerge to bring people together. I think they're struggling a little bit with this issue of effectiveness in terms of their own effectiveness, because now there are service delivery organizations, products. You know, what the Foundation Center is doing with software, for instance, right? That's very product-oriented. They've always been also very service-oriented. They give training and they charge for it. They produce data and they sell it. So they have that system, but a membership organization, it doesn't necessarily have that same service product orientation. And I'm afraid we need to be a little bit more cold-blooded and look to see if that's going to survive in the same way in the next 10 or 15 years because of that. Because I think there's such diversity in terms of where you can get service and product, people may not always turn to the membership organization. And we're going to fall into that same trap of so few people want to fund research and advocacy, right? That's always a struggle. But that leads me back to my first point. We need enabled philanthropy. So maybe we just need to be more specific about our messaging and the way that we sort of present that. But I think membership organizations have always been very strong with that. but I think the service and product orientation needs to increase their effectiveness, and that might be a challenge going forward if we don't think about things in a different way. I mean, let's just be honest, also the space of philanthropy is looking at social issues being solved through more market forces and market models. So the philanthropy infrastructure, membership organizations can't stay too far behind that curve. That the donors are already there thinking about how to use different structures. Our space needs to also be using different structures, I think. And to be honest about, yes, philanthropy is good, we should lift it up, but it can also be limiting. And I'll get to that. Finally, evolving. We need to be constantly evolving. And this notion that philanthropy can be limiting, I know is very provocative, and I know maybe my fellow panelists won't appreciate, you know, that, I don't mean it in 100% way, but just think for a minute. Esas Sosyal is a family fund founded by another branch of the Sabancı family in Turkey, which is a very high net worth family, a very philanthropic family for many years, but it's a newer generation. The company that they set up 20 years ago does all private equity, so they're all about investment. And so when they asked me to help them set up their new fund, they wanted to do this kind of more different next-gen type of philanthropy. Fast forward, we're now working in the space of youth unemployment, and we're trying to bridge the gap between young people and new graduates and employers that hire those new graduates, and the blockage that exists there, the discrimination, and the difficulty that they have to overcome those barriers. What we're realizing is if we engage, one of my E's here, we want to engage other donors, engage other people. If we approach this in a philanthropic way, it's going to limit our ability to reach more young people and place more young people in jobs. If we set it up as a social business, we're going to reach more people. If we set it up as a philanthropy, it's going to limit us to 50, 60, 70 a year. And people are going to say, oh, it's a great idea, we support it this year, but next year we don't have the budget. But if you change the way that they actually hire young people as a service, as a social service though, at an ad cost of market, then maybe we can place 1,000 young people, 3,000 young people, and really do what we all refer to as systems change. So this kind of evolution is happening in my own mind as well. I mean, I think many people in this room, some of which I've worked with very intensively, like Barry, would know that I'm the big proponent of philanthropy. I mean, I've spent the last 17 years of my life in it, but I'm now finding myself in this other space saying, you know what, it's not always really the right way to go. We might be limiting ourselves. So enabled, engaged, entrepreneurial, effective, and evolving. That last bit, are we really evolving? How do we need to evolve? Are we being cold-blooded enough about our own infrastructure, organizations to say, this is what's happening in the world, this is what's changing in the world, and maybe we need to be looking at our own work and our own approaches a little bit differently. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Filiz, for those provocations, I think we can say, on both the challenges of philanthropy coming from well outside the sector as well as within it, and plenty of food for thought for all of us here. And so thank you for that. I'd like to really just open up the conversation to all of you, and there'll be plenty of time to respond to one another and to everyone here. If you could just raise your hands and state the name of the organisation, that'd be really appreciated. We'll start you in the front there.
So, Cara Frampton, I'm from the Peace Nexus Foundation. And Benjamin, you asked, you know, what are the strategies, what are donors kind of thinking about? I'm new to these kind of events and talking about infrastructure. It's very time-consuming. I'm from a Swiss-based small foundation. It's very time-consuming to start to sort of say, okay, which infrastructure should I be part of? Which network? Which association? It takes time. Anyway. So it's good that the question is asked, you know, how do we also as donors use our time in the most effective manner when we want to connect and engage? But you ask for what were sort of strategies. We have, what we fund is not projects or even sort of core organizations, but processes of change. We select partners that we think do a good job in conflict-affected environment, and we help them go through a process of change, and that's all we fund. So it's organizational development for some, but for others it's that it's more about helping them think about and mainstream the conclusions they get to around their interaction with the environment. So what is traditionally called conflict sensitivity. And this year, for the first time, we've actually opened up, we have a call for proposal open right now. And for the first time, we've opened up to community foundations. And so just yeah, we're experimenting. We'll see who responds, who's interested. We had one conversation in Balkans with a group of community foundations where we sort of offered the opportunity, but I think it also goes into this direction of, there's just a paper that came out with Jenny Hodgson around how community foundations shift power, and about maybe also having less of a, donor recipient, but sort of let's all sort of work together. And if we are offering our support for different actors of civil society to transform themselves, how are we ourselves transforming as well, and to sort of maybe blend some of these boundaries. Anyway, that's kind of what I'm interested to hear more about, or see how much interest there is.
We'll come back to you if there's other comments or questions. There's Rose writing.
Thanks so much for a really interesting presentation. I've worked for a couple of infrastructure bodies now, and some of the challenges and opportunities that you're mentioning are really exciting. And I'm wondering partly whether there's different types of infrastructure for different things that are part of the ecosystem. So my foundation is only members of organisations that have a particular campaigning or political lens. We don't go for the services or whatever. But then the infrastructure body that I used to work for, our services were, our products, as you put them, were our bread and butter, and we had an effectiveness and learning team that was specifically for this. But my question was actually about academia and how you see academia fitting into this infrastructure.
And one more question.
So Eden from the bilateral chair in Philanthropy and Social Investment. We were talking about academia. So I'm from the University of Liège in Belgium, and so I'm studying how young people, so I'm doing a thesis and I'm studying how young people enter this ecosystem. So young people that are not from the next gen, but young people that develop new organizations, social businesses that allow every citizen to give time, money, talent, skills. And I'm really interested in what Filiz said about philanthropy evolving and philanthropy being more entrepreneurial. And this is all questions that I'm trying to address. And it's really interesting to see that you, that are considered the ecosystem part, the infrastructure part, so the big player in the philanthropy field are also questioning these issues. And what's really interesting is that young people with which I meet do not know you and do not know how to enter this ecosystem and how to have an impact on what you do in the day-to-day activities. So I'm really glad to be here and to hear all those conversations.
And it's great from, I think, from the sector's point of view, we have scholars in the room, scholars of philanthropy, and we've seen more than one. Let's bring back to the conversation here on the panel. Masha, do you want to start with responding to any of the three comments from Rose, Eugenie, or from Frank?
Well, I think it's important to how should I say that? Okay, for us at CAF, philanthropy and giving is a cause in itself. Right. So it's not that philanthropy only exists to solve different problems for the world. It gives people a way to express themselves and to participate and to be citizens and to get together and deal with issues which they feel they need to deal with, whatever these issues are. And the fact that young people do it now in a much more kind of active way than before, that's really why infrastructure should be there for them to help and to, make them more effective and help them, leap through the issues which they're struggling with. And we see it in Russia too, where I work, when lots of youth groups, volunteer groups, which maybe get together on Facebook first, they start doing something real, and they influence the field. They end up changing policies because they're really committed to it. And they probably wouldn't be able to do that if they didn't, meet on their way, organizations like us and others who would, help them through different loops. That's why, yes, I agree with you that we need to be more entrepreneurial, and maybe business is the way to, achieve things that philanthropy wouldn't be so good at achieving. But on the other hand, this is the way of expression and positive expression. And in many places where political expression is not available, this is probably the only way. So that's kind of, at least parliaments.
Yeah, I think I can build on that because thank you. I mean, that was really interesting, and I think there are very relevant questions that you raised, and I think that it's exactly the kind of debate we need to have. So, but I completely agree with Masha with what you're saying, and I will also say that it's not contradictory. I think that first, the evolutions that you're mentioning and the fact that all these market approaches to change and social change, I think probably if we didn't have some people researching the field, people understanding what's happening, these approaches would not even exist. So, I mean, if there is no infrastructure in first place, you cannot reach this level of sophistication in your approach to social problems, I think. But even considering that, I think that there's no contradiction. I think we need all sorts of approach, because business solutions won't address all kind of problems and also all the problems of the world. So they will solve some of them probably more efficiently than some other approaches. And once again, philanthropy, when we're talking about philanthropy in this room, we're talking about all sorts of philanthropy, including more business-oriented approaches to philanthropy and venture philanthropy and these kind of things. So I think that's part of the same conversation. And about being cold-blooded, I think that I agree we need to be cold-blooded with organizations, and probably Barry will agree also with me, but not with what they do. So it's really about what are we trying to achieve, what are the needs that we are fulfilling, what is the potential that we're trying to unlock, and then see how the organizations can deliver that together. And if some of them are not relevant anymore, okay, let's address that. I agree. Otherwise, we can move forward. That's why we are saying it's not about organizations. It's about what we're looking for, and that's why it requires a reflection. So yeah, and then I think that the membership association question is a critical one, and we're going to. I will let our colleagues in the room talk about it because they have a lot to say. But we see that there is a whole debate to have on this type of infrastructure, which is a type of infrastructure, and indeed there are a lot of challenges. And I guess maybe Natalie will want to speak about.
Oh yeah, that might be a good moment actually to bring Natalie in about what are membership organisations for? Are they fit for purpose? There's questions about that Filiz was raising about the disruption that they're experiencing. And Council on Foundations in the US, one of the largest or larger organisations developing infrastructure support to probably the largest philanthropic community in the US. How are you experiencing those disruptions and changes?
So, hi everyone, I'm Natalie.
Sorry to pick
on Foundations, based in Washington. The council is turning 70 years old last year, so we've been around for a very long time. And when the council was created, there was not a lot of other philanthropic infrastructure in the United States. And today, the count's not exact, but there's over 300 philanthropy networks and service providers to the philanthropic sector. So it's an incredibly competitive space, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't admit that there's competition there, because the base of users, although philanthropy is growing, it's growing in lots of different ways. It's not necessarily growing in the traditional types of foundations that would be part of a membership organization. And so how do you, as a large, relatively old organization, evolve with the sector and not get too far behind as the sector's evolving around you? And that's a huge challenge for the council. We've had to rethink absolutely everything about our membership model over the last 6 years. And we've really tried to reshape everything from the business side of kind of how are you bringing in resources, what percentage of your revenue is membership to be more sustainable, what are other revenue sources through products, services, etc., to be more competitive in the marketplace, alongside thinking about how do you make the case. And I think that's the real challenge, especially when you play what we would call a big tent role in U.S. philanthropy. And think a lot of the growth has been in hyper-specific networks that go a mile deep on any one issue and bring funders working around the same thing together. we as an organization believe there's a space for the big tent of the sector, which means we often don't take position on specific issues like education or health or climate in order to take positions on the sector overall, which is incredibly difficult. And then you have the freeloader problem, right? So if we're defending the infrastructure, working on tax reform in the United States, everyone assumes someone else will pay for it. And we're going to defend the entire sector. And so why do you have to be a member in order to pay for that defending? And that's, I think, the biggest challenge is if you choose to say, as we have, to stay a mile wide, then what are those services that are both broad enough for the sector as a whole, but also people feel like are as aligned enough with what they're doing that they want to pay for it. So it's a continuous conversation that we have.
Thank you for that perspective. Filiz, do you want to respond to that or any other comments?
Yeah, no, I'll start with this question about engaging young people and how people enter the sector. I mean, I think we all have our own stories, and they're very different and very diverse. I think that there's a lot more space now than there used to be. Actually, I see very much, even in the EFC, there's a lot younger people attending. I mean, I've been to, I think, 15 of these so far. So, yeah, this might be 15. And it's getting younger and younger, and I think that there's a lot of recognition of these so-called infrastructure organizations to bring young people in. They have a scholarship program now that brings young people in and so forth. And I think we're looking for those opportunities. This is very much of a networking sector. That's basically how you come to learn and know. There are some really wonderful fellowship programs. I was one of the emerging leader fellows at the Center on Philanthropy in New York, and that's 2-3 months, and you get to explore different topics. So there's definitely a lot more than there used to be, and I think that, you know, and I think academia, that point about academia also in the back, how that fits in, I think is a really good segue to that point, which is how we can bring more young people and more thinking and more content into the sector is to promote support for these kinds of fellowship programs and increase. We have 2 friends now from Turkey in the Indiana program, in the master's program, and it's opening their minds and opening their worlds, and I think that that's really important. I want to come back to this whole issue. I mean, lifting up philanthropy. I keep having this WINGS ad. It says, increase impact, develop philanthropy, join WINGS, right? And I'm wondering if I wasn't necessarily very familiar with this sector, or maybe the founder that I work for, the family that I work for, she would ask me, what does it mean to develop philanthropy? And I would probably quickly be like, these 5 E's, you know, enabled, engaged, entrepreneurial, effective, evolving. She's like, oh, okay, I get it now. So maybe we're always telling grantees to not tell us about activities, but tell us about outcomes, right? Maybe we don't need to position ourselves as, well, we do data, we research, you know, we have conference, and those are all activity level. Maybe we need to communicate outcome level. That will help us make the case for why support in this sector and for philanthropy is so important. So maybe adding a few more hashtags, I don't know what the solution is, but, or if it's these 5 E's or, I don't know, 10 I's or 3 A's, but
4 C's.
4 C's, what are the 4 C's?
Collaborate, communicate.
No,
Collaborate.
there's impact,
Which ones are
impact
those?
areas of infrastructure organizations as
The capacity,
suggested by
capability,
Barry
connection,
Knight.
and credibility.
So wonderful, right? So this kind of, you know, communicating that level of outcome, I think, might also help with this discussion. And yeah, I think ultimately I was moderating a session with the head of the Bosch Stiftung and the founder of Acumen, Jacqueline Novogratz. And I mean, she said just a number of really wonderful things, but one of them was, you know, it's not about doing good in the world, it's about solving a particular problem. So that issue and that focus on outcome, I think, might also help us. Like, we're sort of the choir, right? We all know why philanthropy is important and how we need to support it, and that it's an issue area in and of itself. But I mean, there's a wider audience that we're trying to reach and engage right now, and I think the difference between how we communicate to each other and how we communicate with them needs to be a little bit different, perhaps. Maybe that's one of the areas we need to question in that sense, so that we're communicating that we're trying to solve a problem. That, you know, that it's not just for the sake of philanthropy and from that aspect. So.
And thank you. And it's clear that the languages of philanthropy are evolving and are struggling to find the right words and languages. And of course, the business community clearly has an important role to play, but so does philanthropy in maybe articulating the voices of those that don't have voice and representing those minorities too. And I know there's been work from some member organisations, such as the Council on Diversity, and there's a debate there later on. Masha is going to pick up on the question of academia in a moment. I can see Jen Blockhoff at the back and other voices, and then we'll come back to you. Thank you. Jen,
Sure.
and Jen and Barry. And then.
Sure, Jen Blockhoff from Foundation Center. That comment and others has really provoked for me how we can build trust with the broader community of emerging philanthropy. So whether that's giving circles, which was mentioned early on, youth, academia, we're all institutions that are trying to reshape the way that we do our business and offer our services. And I think I've seen, that's where I see the biggest problem, honestly, with philanthropy infrastructure. And we're to blame as well at Foundation Center. We've always talked about traditional philanthropy. Our data is about who's giving what and where, but the asterisk next to that is what foundations are giving what where, which is by no means covering what all of philanthropy is. And so one experiment that we tried a couple of years ago, and it's still up, it's still a great website, we built something called youthgiving.org, which is meant to be the home for youth grant makers, and there's actually a parallel breakfast meeting right now that Youth Bank International is hosting. And what's been a really interesting piece of that experiment is in the beginning when we were doing a lot of communications and outreach to youth around this website and what they could learn from it. So get connected to other programs who are doing this, steal resources from each other so that they're not reinventing the wheel, and actually see the data of where youth were funding. It was a big deal, but as time has gone on, and without sustained effort in saying, like, we're here for you, we have this stuff that can really help you, we don't have trust with the global youth community because Foundation Center is still Foundation Center. We're like, we're growing, we're evolving, but we're not known as like a home for youth or a home for other kinds of philanthropy. And so it's sort of a question to the room and just amusing that I've been sitting with, which is like reinvention is hard and opening up to new audiences is hard. So how do we do it effectively?
Right. Such a good point.
Thank you. Barry.
I mean, it seems to me that one of the things we're suffering from is that the key institutions that form the philanthropy infrastructure were formed at a time before Twitter, before YouTube, before this opening up, this global opening up. And they've had, the infrastructure has developed. There is a timeline in a 2014 Wings report, actually, of the main milestones of when various organisations were formed. The first one was in 1924, and it was CAF. Masha paid me to say that.
Paid advertising.
I'm her agent, so it's all right. And it seems to me that philanthropy is evolving, and it's evolving in really exciting ways. And the opportunity of the kind of global reach of philanthropy now, and what's happened, I think, with the infrastructure is got stuck in geography. It's got stuck in places so that we have a geographic focus. Now, you look at the statistics, there's a complete imbalance between need and provision, because 80% of the expenditure, if you look at the Wings database, which I have, 80% of the expenditure on infrastructure goes into the United States. Well, actually, the really exciting bits of philanthropy, I'm afraid, are in other bits of the world. They're in the global south, and where there is very little in the way of infrastructure. So in the ecosystem paper that I wrote there, I compared Europe with India. And there's lots of interesting philanthropy in India, but nobody knows about it because there's no kind of, well, it's changing now, but there isn't a kind of coordinating force. And it seems to me that one of the real challenges and one of the way we can make progress, rather than bemoaning the fact that infrastructure is not as we ideally, the answer is in our own hands. And it actually involves every institution thinking about its patch, but also thinking internationally, and with whom it can kind of connect. So the EFC connects with the Foundation Centre, connects with the Council on Foundations, connects with the Global Fund for Community Foundations, with the, the centre at CUNY, that we begin to, and the reason I use the word ecosystem, it's a misnomer actually. An ecosystem has nothing to do with this. An ecosystem is a biological system. But if we can think about systems theory and joining up different institutions and thinking about what they do create, actually Wings and Daphne have done a lot of work on effectiveness, which isn't, I don't think, showcased in the issue. So in a way, a key thing, it seems to me, that ought to come out of this discussion is the leadership of the infrastructure field. Christ, let's find a new word for infrastructure.
Yes.
But within this room and within this conference, there is a way, if you could sit down and think, how do we actually make progress? And Oksana Arasheva and I wrote an article in Alliance in December. Philanthropy needs a new story. And it's philanthropy, the changes in philanthropy, we're using an old, out-of-date Anglo-American paradigm to describe philanthropy. That's the problem. And therefore, the infrastructure is using an old, out-of-date Anglo-American paradigm. And we need to shift the power and look at the lens through the global south and the global east and bring that back. And that's the story, why philanthropy needs a new story. But if there's sufficient knowledge and expertise within the field to make that, and the Wings can play a really powerful leadership role in bringing those people together to have those kinds of difficult conversations, because the old organisational models of, the plant, lots of office people, is gone. It's nimble organisations, using YouTube, using Twitter, using data in ways. It's a collaboration model.
Thank you, Barry. So, a woman, I think, was it you? There you go.
Thank you. Hi. This is Joy from Light for the World. I wanted to reflect back on a comment that I thought was extremely interesting, was the idea of the systems change. Okay? So we're going out talking to people that we're doing the systems change to unlock the power of people with disabilities in the world's most rural areas, where you actually have no infrastructure, where there are no schools, absolutely nothing available for them. So then now I want to reflect on the idea of the vocabulary. So a systems change, but when people are, the foundations or whoever is talking to you about, what's the timeline? 3 years. Sure, you can change the whole world in 3 years. So I'm turning to the organizations who are in the, like Wings or EFC or wherever, to turn to them to change to help people change the mindset, the vocabulary, the language, from projects that are 3 or 5 years to projects to actually looking at systems change, which involves a different way of looking at things, different impact measurements, different monitoring, evaluation, and not so focused. Yes, we do need data on the people with disabilities or people on the ground. There's actually something much higher, and this is where we're turning to you to see how we can change the vocabulary, the language, and the mindset. So I see it very much as education. So thank you for bringing this up.
Well, thank you, Joy. So we've got comments from Joy, from Barry, from Jen. Is there any particular one? What about the challenge that Barry poses? And maybe a challenge to the special feature. Is it too conservative? And we showcase some of the pioneers of philanthropy's development in the past. There are questions around leadership. We have a section on leadership, but does it go far enough? What do you make of what Barry said?
Yeah, maybe, and it's also because if the forms are moving, and if you are like looking at, I don't know, people being involved on the social media and YouTube to like crowdfunding and these ice bucket challenges and these kind of approaches, then it's also more difficult to identify and to say, okay, that's the person we're going to talk to and who is going to talk to us about what they're doing, because it might be just an initiative and then it's gone and someone else will do something else to connect the dollar. So maybe that's also why it's harder to grasp and to kind of put in the box and have in a paper like that. But definitely, I mean, I agree with very, very much about the need for changing the lens on the field and the leadership role of organizations, definitely. But I think that the important thing, I mean, there were a lot of questions about the impact of the field. So, and as it was mentioned, we're doing a lot of work with our members to look at the impact of this field, which is of course very difficult to identify because we're talking about systems change, we're talking about very long-term processes, and also with processes that most of the time involve different actors in it. So I mean, tracking the direct relationship between your action and what the outcome is very difficult, but still we need to try it. And that's also our leadership role at Wings, is to push the sector to do it more. And that's what we're doing. And actually we have a few very interesting examples to show. But let's take one, for example, or let's take two. Let's take one that is very easy to understand, and that's the Giving Tuesday campaigns. So exactly. So you can talk about it, but I mean that's just basically that's this with a campaign like that. So you will tell us how much it costs to run a campaign like the Giving Tuesday campaign, but probably not much. And out of that, last year they generated more than $300 million for civil society. So then you can question, I mean, are these dollars well invested? Are they, are they efficient, and etc. But still, there are $3 million generated for civil society worldwide in 1 year with a campaign that maybe, I don't know, costed $1 million or something like that. So I mean, the impact is huge. It's extremely important if you think the impact in terms of developing philanthropy. Then, of course, the second step is what does this philanthropy do, and that's also the job of this philanthropy support ecosystem, is to help guide it in a relevant way and maximize its efficiency. But that's just an example that I think is easy to understand. Another one is the impact. Imagine the impact that when like a network, like the Council or another national philanthropic body advocates for a more incentive regulatory environment for philanthropy. It can also generate a very important development of the field, and we've seen that happening in different countries, including well, we know some examples in Canada, in France, and in other places where the fact that there has been an infrastructure organization working on advocating with the government. They created a law that facilitates the establishment of foundations, of endowment funds, or have tax incentives, and that generates billions and billions of euros or dollars or rupees of private money for public good. And so that's an incredibly important contribution, and we don't see that. We only see, again, in terms of crisis and how this infrastructure failed at pushing back against maybe a regulation from a state, which is of course sometimes difficult to push back against. So that's definitely important, but there is impact. So the work is really being more efficient at assessing it and communicating it, and then we have a framework for that. So, but now it's the responsibility of everyone also to share what they do and what their outcomes are, and of course try to improve all the time what they do and their efficiency.
Is there an issue though that there's an assumption that if you can demonstrate impact, then that will appeal to funders? And Yanni Pen, the CEO of the Narada Foundation in China, says in the issue, funders have to be patient, be prepared to offer multi-year grants, accept there won't necessarily be immediate return, tolerate failures and be comfortable not to be in the spotlight. So that sets quite a high bar in terms of the expectations of funders' behaviour. Do you think funders are in a place that if they were to see the demonstrable impact of the development of philanthropy that's engendered by organisations like yours, they will invest in it?
I think that some of them will. I think that some of them, if they change their understanding about this field and they consider what they can contribute to on the long term, and if they are, if they have the vision on that, I think they would.
Masha? You don't have to respond to that question if there are other things you want to say in relation to some of the other people that raised points.
Yeah, I did, but Benjamin kind of stealed my line about Giving Tuesday in a good way.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm really happy you're bringing that up. So we at CAF Russia are leaders of Giving Tuesday in Russia. So we are kind of part of this culture, and I should say that that's, well, besides kind of great results and everything, that's a really big culture shift for us to be part of Giving Tuesday, because that's a completely different everything. And one of the founders of Giving Tuesday, Henry Timms, wrote a book which is called New Power. Maybe some of you have heard about it. If you haven't, you should really get hold of it. And basically the idea is that there is this new power systems, organizations, communities that are very different from the old power ones, because they are based on sharing, distribution, they're leaderless in a way that everyone is a leader, and they're not hierarchical, they're based on collective decision-making rather than experts' decision-making. And in many respects, they're very different from the old power institutions. Thing is that philanthropy, as we see it, it's very old power. And what we're talking now about, that we need to engage with more people, we need to look at different forms, that's more a new power, where you don't promote your brand, you don't look at the needs of your organization as kind of the one who is holding something or owning something. You kind of distribute things and you share things, and kind of the beauty of it is in this sharing. You produce the results, you produce the, not results, but you produce materials and you put them on the website right away because others need to use it for you to be able to achieve collective impact. And it's very difficult, even when I think CAF Russia is pretty kind of dynamic and democratic. It's very difficult for us to kind of start working in this way, because it's difficult to understand how we invest in things and then we don't brand them, for example. And the key is not to brand them, because others would not engage if you brand it. So I think we have a lot to learn, and maybe answering the question about would foundations go for it. Maybe some of them wouldn't, because that's too dramatic difference. But I mean, it's worth it.
Filiz, a brief comment, and then we'll bring in Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to your point about communicating to new audiences. I mean, philanthropy maybe in different parts of the world, certainly, I mean, I see it in Turkey, but I see it all over, was more focused on the wealthy giving. And now with Giving Tuesday, with crowdfunding, with this, with that, it's so much more open. And so maybe that really is another good question for this kind of space of people working in philanthropy to develop, as philanthropy as a subject, is your audience is not just foundations anymore. Your audience is not just really wealthy individuals. It's everyone. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. A second thing is that, this evolution that's happening, I'm seeing it again from this perspective of Turkey. There's a serious pressure on civil society to operate, and a lot of barriers in Turkey, and a lot of people are looking to much more fragmented movements to raise money, social entrepreneurships, and younger people getting involved in kind of competitions with ideas and so on, because setting up a nonprofit is really difficult, running one is even more difficult. So people are finding other ways to express their voice and their engagement in civil society and for the benefit of a country that doesn't involve, they're kind of circumventing traditional philanthropy and civil society structures, because you can't operate within those spaces anymore. There's just too many restrictions. So, the opportunity that this shrinking space is bringing to the sector is also something else to think about, I think, in that sense. And finally, my last point on that is just, it's not about how, it's about what. I think we're really over the how at this point. SDGs bring us back to the what. Human rights issues, migration issues, youth unemployment, whatever it is, people are much more concerned, I think, whether they're foundations or individuals, less about how things are done, much more about who's doing what and how the impact it. And I think that's why the focus on impact is, but that's the sense that I'm getting. People want to hear more about that. And then how.
I don't agree. I think how is super important.
For us it is. I'm just saying for the expanding audience, my sense is that it's not.
People wouldn't participate in anything that is hierarchical, that doesn't recognize their importance and doesn't allow them to share, to influence, regardless of how important the cause is. So unless you leave the values, you won't be able to transcend them.
be continued. Kathleen.
There were some questions about academic institutions.
Yes.
And I think at the simplest level, we gather and disseminate ideas. I'm Kathleen McCarthy, and I direct the Fellows Program, the Center on Philanthropy and Society at CUNY. We have the Fellows Program. And, you know, our fellows met with Asha Curran for 3 hours last week, or a couple of weeks ago, and found Giving Tuesday. So, you know, they're studying giving circles, and they learn about them from one of our fellows in South Africa, for example. So we've never exported American models. We've always been agile, I think, in terms of trying to find out the best models from around the world, whether it's the funding network, whether it's crowdfunding, whether it's creating traditional community foundations, and our fellows have been very active in creating new organizations around the world, from Filiz and the Bolu Community Foundation, which was the first community foundation in Turkey, to Nasher Dadwala in India, who runs the Center on Philanthropy and has introduced all sorts of novel innovations in India. So you don't have to be stodgy, and once again, academic institutions are the ones who can transfer these ideas and these models around the world, and not just from the viewpoint of the West.
Thank you, and if I may just very briefly use the chair's privilege before we wrap up, just for a couple of observations about academia, because following my time and tenure at directing a family foundation at sabbatical at Stanford, I was teaching a class on philanthropy and conducting research about the growth and development of philanthropy education in higher education institutions. And it does seem that there is an interesting shift with the growth of academic centres and training and teaching about philanthropy, although I think your model is quite rare in terms of its international outlook, willingness to engage with practitioners. And I think there is a wider question about the funding base for academic knowledge production around scholarship around philanthropy, which is still to be determined. We're seeing some academic centres rise, but others, such as the Odessian funding Centre for Strategic Philanthropy in Rotterdam, fall. So I don't think there's any certainty about the funding model, whereas philanthropy to fund higher education generally, there's thousands of fundraisers in that space. So I think there's some questions about critical scholarship around philanthrophy set in disciplinary settings. So business schools will ask questions around business and governance and leadership, but philosophy schools will ask philosophical questions about justice and its relationship to philanthropy. I think that research infrastructure is really critical and emerging, and certainly one that we'll be watching at Alliance. But I'm afraid that's all we're going to have time for today in this discussion. I hope you've enjoyed kicking off the start of the European Foundation Centre Conference here with us at Alliance and with Wings. It's a real privilege and honour to have such an international and diverse group of people in the room and on the panel from Brazil and France, from Turkey, from Russia, and from the UK, trying to be good Europeans at Alliance. I'm here in Brussels today. So thank you to all of you. We haven't talked about the philanthropy media as part of the development of philanthropy, but it is something that I at Alliance am very conscious of as the editor of Alliance, a non-profit independent philanthropy media that can hold up a mirror to philanthropy and ask critical questions of the field. But in order to do that, we need your subscriptions and in some cases donations to sustain our work. So please do talk to Amy over here and David at the back. If you want to, both of whom are here today and supporting the work of Alliance very much behind the scenes and making our job to cover what you do possible. Later this year we'll have editions on Muslim philanthropy in September and coverage of rural philanthropy and the institutions of rural philanthropy from the Gulf to the Commonwealth in December, and then looking at systems change later in 2019. So more coverage of different parts of philanthropy around the world from Alliance. I'd like to end by just thanking our panellists and in particular our guest editors, Masha and Benjamin, and for your responses, Filiz, here today. Clearly there's a wide-ranging set of questions to ask that will continue. For a word like infrastructure that some people are signing its obituary, we have used it a lot today. So I'm not so sure that the word is as dead as might be suggested, but we will see, and we will continue to look at this issue. So thanks to all of you. There's coffee and refreshments that we weren't able to provide here downstairs ready for you before the plenary. Thank you all very, very much for coming. I look forward to continuing dialogue.